I swear, if I could erase one night from my life, it would be that dinner. The one where everything I thought I knew about my family started to crack, like fine china breaking under too much pressure. It was supposed to be simple: roast chicken, wine, and a quiet evening. But then David's mother, Margaret, showed up unannounced. Of course she did. She never called, never knocked, just swept into our home like she owned it. Her perfume, something sharp and expensive, arrived before she did, filling the room and suffocating me. "Sally, you've overcooked the chicken again," she said, lifting her fork like she was holding evidence in court. "David always liked it tender. Didn't you, sweetheart?" David chuckled nervously, eyes darting to me, then back to his plate. He didn't defend me. He never did when it came to her. I bit down so hard on my tongue I tasted blood. "Maybe David should cook next time," I said, my voice cooler than the wine glass in my hand. Margaret smiled. Oh, that cruel, condescending smile. "Cooking isn't a man's job, dear. But then again, neither is handling finances. I do hope you're not interfering in matters you don't understand." The way she said it, like I was some ignorant child, it lit a fire inside me. "Excuse me?" I asked, pushing my chair back. David reached across the table. "Sally, please." "No, David," I snapped. "If your mother thinks she can waltz into my house and insult me—" "Our house," Margaret corrected, her eyes gleaming like she'd won something. That did it. The room exploded. I don't remember half the words we threw at each other, but I remember the sound of my fist hitting the table, the plates rattling, and the silence that followed. David just sat there, his face pale, his lips pressed tight like he was swallowing his own words. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I stormed out of the dining room, shaking, my chest tight like I couldn't breathe. I wanted to scream, to cry, to hit something. Instead, I went upstairs, straight to our bedroom. And that's when I heard it. A faint click. A whisper of static. At first, I thought it was in my head. But then I saw it, the tiniest black device tucked behind the lamp on my nightstand. A listening device. My blood turned to ice. I picked it up with trembling hands, staring at it like it was a poisonous snake. Who would plant something like this in my home? My eyes darted around the room, suddenly suspicious of every corner, every shadow. When David came upstairs an hour later, I was still sitting on the edge of the bed, holding the thing in my palm. "What's that?" he asked, his voice tired, cautious. "You tell me," I whispered, my voice shaking. He frowned. "Sally, I've never seen that before." "What is it?" "It's a bug, David. Someone's been listening to us." His face drained of color. "Who would? Why would?" He looked at me like I had the answer. And the truth is, a horrifying suspicion was already forming in my mind. I knew someone who had always been too curious, too controlling, too close. My mother. Sarah. That night, sleep was impossible. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. If my mother had planted this, then why? What could she possibly want to hear? And if it wasn't her, then who? The next morning, I drove straight to her house without telling David. My hands gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I needed answers. When she opened the door, her face lit up. "Sally." What a surprise. But when I held up the device, her smile faltered. Just slightly, but enough. "Care to explain?" I asked. Her lips parted, her eyes flicked to the device, then back to me. For a moment, she said nothing. Just silence. And then she whispered, "You weren't supposed to find that." My world tilted. The ground beneath me gave way. That was the moment everything I thought I knew about my life began to unravel. For a second, I thought I'd misheard her. My mother's words hung in the air like smoke, curling into every corner of my mind, choking me. "You weren't supposed to find that." My grip tightened around the bug in my hand. "What do you mean, Mom? Why would you even... How could you plant something like this in my house?" Sarah's face softened, but her eyes stayed sharp, calculating, like she was measuring how much truth to give me. She reached out, but I pulled back before her hand could touch mine. "You don't understand, Sally," she said, her voice trembling in a way I wasn't used to. "My mother had always been iron, never glass. I wasn't spying on you." "Not really. Not really." My laugh came out brittle broken. What is this then? A gift from Santa? Don't play games with me, Mom. She sighed and pressed a hand to her temple. I had to protect you. Things aren't what you think they are in that house. I froze. What do you mean? Her eyes flicked to the side, toward the kitchen, like she needed the comfort of a cigarette or maybe just something solid to lean on. Margaret, she said finally. Just her name, but laced with venom. She's not the woman she pretends to be, and she would do anything to keep control. I shook my head. Mom, Margaret's cruel, I know that. But bugging my bedroom? What on earth does that have to do with her? Her lips pressed together, trembling before she spoke. Because she's tied to everything. To your father. To the lies. To the life you've been living. I blinked, my chest tightening. My father? You mean Dad Andrew. And then, she looked at me the way you look at a child who still believes in fairy tales, and it broke something deep inside me. No, Sally, she whispered. Not Andrew. Richard. The room spun. My stomach twisted, as if the floor had dropped out beneath me. Richard? Who the hell is Richard? Her hands twisted together in her lap, the veins standing out, her knuckles pale. Richard was your real father. My first love. The man I should have married. But Margaret and Andrew, she cut herself off, her voice cracking. I felt the heat rise to my face. Stop. Just stop. Are you telling me that Andrew, Dad, the man who raised me, wasn't even my father? She nodded, tears finally spilling over. I wanted to tell you, Sally. 1,000 times I wanted to. But you were so young, and then it was too late. Andrew controlled everything. He had the money, the reputation. Her breath hitched, her shoulders trembling as she forced herself to continue. He framed Richard. Ruined him. Made sure the world saw him as nothing but a criminal. And Margaret, she helped him. The words hit me like a series of blows. Framed. Ruined. Criminal. My ears buzzed with static, the same sound that had first come from that cursed device. You're lying, I whispered, but it sounded weak even to me. Sarah grabbed my hand this time, and I didn't pull away. Her fingers were cold, desperate. I swear to you, Sally, I'm not lying. Richard was innocent. Andrew embezzled from his own firm and pinned it all on Richard. He sent him to prison, destroyed his name, and left me with nothing but shame. My throat closed. And you let me grow up thinking Andrew was my father? You let me love him? You let me grieve him when he died. Tears blurred my vision. I remembered Andrew's funeral. Margaret dressed in black silk, her crocodile tears soaking handkerchief after handkerchief. And me, a dutiful daughter, standing beside her, mourning a man who wasn't even mine to mourn. I thought I was protecting you, Sarah whispered. If I told you the truth, Margaret would have destroyed you too. She's been watching us for years, Sally. Watching me. That's why I put the device in your house. I had to know if she was pulling David into her schemes. Her words burned through me. Suddenly, the insults at the dinner table, the endless little digs Margaret threw my way, didn't feel random anymore. They felt intentional, calculated. I stood, pacing the living room, my body buzzing with rage and betrayal. So all this time Margaret knew? She knew Andrew wasn't my real father. Sarah's silence was answer enough. God. I pressed my palms to my face. This is insane. You're telling me my life, my whole life, has been one big, twisted lie. She rose slowly, her face weary. I'm telling you the truth now. What you do with it, that's up to you. I looked at her, my mother, the woman I thought I knew better than anyone, and for the first time, I wasn't sure if I could trust her. But deep down, a terrible feeling gnawed at me. That maybe, just maybe, she was telling the truth. And if she was, then Margaret wasn't just meddling in my marriage. She was guarding secrets worth destroying lives over. I don't remember driving home that day. My hands clutched the steering wheel, but my mind was nowhere on the road. My mother's words played over and over, like a broken record I couldn't shut off. Not Andrew. Richard. Every time I repeated it in my head, my stomach churned. Richard. The name sounded foreign, but something inside me recoiled like it wasn't foreign at all. Like maybe I'd heard it whispered once, a long time ago, but had been too young to understand. When I pulled into our driveway, David's car was still parked out front. For a second, I sat in the car, just staring at the house. My house. Our house. Except now, it felt like nothing inside it was really mine. David was in the living room when I walked in, his tie loosened, his head in his hands. He looked up when the door clicked shut. Relief washed across his face. "There you are," he said, standing. "Sally, where did you go?" I was worried. "Cut it," I snapped, tossing my purse onto the couch. My voice came out harsher than I intended, but I couldn't stop. "Did you know?" His brow furrowed. "Know what?" "Don't play dumb, David. Did you know Andrew wasn't my real father?" The color drained from his face so fast I knew. I knew before he opened his mouth. "Who told you that?" he asked carefully. My heart sank. "So it's true." David's hands went up, defensive, as he stepped toward me. "Sally, please. I didn't know how to tell you. It wasn't my secret to share." "Oh, so you did know." My laugh was sharp, bitter. "How long have you been keeping it from me?" "Months. Years." His shoulders slumped. "Since before we were married." "My mother told me." "Margaret," I hissed. Her name was poison on my tongue. "Yes," he admitted, guilt flickering across his face. "She said it wasn't my place to bring it up, that your mother had her reasons for keeping it from you." I thought she was protecting you." My chest tightened, a sharp ache pressing against my ribs. "Protecting me?" I echoed. "By building my whole life on lies?" David reached for me, but I pulled back. I couldn't bear his touch, not when I was drowning in betrayal from every direction. "Why didn't you fight her, David?" My voice cracked. "Why do you always let your mother run everything? Our lives, our marriage, me?" His face crumpled. "Because she's all I've ever known, Sally. My father was gone before I could walk, and she's strong. She controls everything. Sometimes it's easier to give in than to fight her." I shook my head, tears stinging my eyes. "That's not strength, David. That's fear. And it's cost us everything." Silence settled between us, heavy and suffocating. For the first time, I saw him not as my husband, but as Margaret's son. A man molded by her power, her control. Finally, I whispered, "I need to know the truth." "All of it." David swallowed hard. "Then you'll have to confront her yourself. She'll never stop otherwise." The thought made my skin crawl. Margaret, with her perfect posture, her cutting smile, her talent for turning every word into a dagger. But he was right. That night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling while David slept beside me. My mind wouldn't stop racing. My mother's tears, David's guilt, the hollow echo of the word Richard. Richard? Who was he, really? A criminal, as I'd always been told? Or the victim my mother swore he was? The next morning, I dressed carefully, armor in the form of a crisp blouse and my steadiest heels. If Margaret wanted a war, I wasn't walking into it weak. When I arrived at her house, she was already in the sitting room, perched on her velvet armchair like a queen awaiting her subject. "Sally," she said smoothly as though nothing had happened at dinner the other night. What a surprise. I sat across from her, every nerve in my body on fire. "Cut the act, Margaret." "I know." Her brows arched. "Know what?" "That Andrew wasn't my real father. That you've been lying to me my entire life." For the first time I saw her mask slip. Only for a second, but it was there. A flicker of something cold, dangerous. Then just as quickly, she smiled. "So Sarah finally told you. How convenient." My heart pounded. "Don't you dare twist this back on her. You and Andrew destroyed Richard, didn't you?" Margaret leaned forward, her eyes glittering like shards of glass. "Be very careful, Sally. Curiosity has a way of digging up things better left buried." Her voice was calm, but beneath it was a warning, a threat. And in that moment, I knew. My mother hadn't exaggerated. Margaret wasn't just cruel. She was dangerous. When I stepped out of Margaret's house, the morning air felt sharp against my skin, like it was trying to wake me from a nightmare. But this wasn't a nightmare. It was real. Margaret's warning echoed in my ears. Curiosity has a way of digging up things better left buried. It wasn't just a warning. It was a threat. And I knew myself well enough to realize I couldn't let it go. If I backed down now, I'd be living under her shadow forever, never knowing what was truth and what was one of her carefully spun lies. Driving home, my hands gripped the steering wheel so tight they ached. I thought about David, how small he'd looked last night, admitting he'd known the truth but done nothing. And my mother, crying as she confessed the pieces of a story that shattered everything I believed about my family. If I was going to survive this, if I was going to reclaim my life, I needed more than whispers and broken confessions. I needed proof. That night, when David was asleep, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop, the glow of the screen throwing shadows across the walls. I typed Richard Montgomery into the search bar. Pages and pages popped up. Old news articles, financial records, even prison reports. My chest tightened as I clicked through them. Local accountant sentenced to 15 years for embezzlement. Scandal at Montgomery and Gray. Senior partner convicted. Richard Montgomery guilty. Judge rules. Every headline screamed guilty. But I read closer, scrolling through yellowed newspaper scans. Something bothered me. The articles were vague. No direct quotes from Richard. No detailed breakdown of evidence. Just summaries in Margaret's favorite kind of words. Alleged. Suspected. Reportedly. And one detail made me sit up straighter. The trial had been fast. Too fast. Arrest to sentencing in just 6 months. It didn't feel right. I leaned back, rubbing my temples. My mother's voice echoed in my head. Andrew framed him. Margaret helped. I wanted to believe it, but belief wasn't enough. Scrolling deeper, I found a name buried in the corner of an article. Harold Pierce, company accountant. He had testified during the trial, his records supposedly proving Richard's guilt. An idea sparked in my chest. If anyone knew the truth about what really happened, it had to be Harold Pierce. The next morning, I tracked him down. It took hours, digging through directories, calling dead phone numbers, but finally, I found a listing. Harold Pierce, retired, living 2 towns over. I told David I was going to visit my mother. He didn't question it. Maybe he was too afraid of what answers I was chasing. The drive out was quiet, the kind of quiet where your thoughts are louder than the radio. By the time I pulled up to a modest, weather-beaten house with a sagging porch, my heart was pounding. I knocked, and after a long pause, the door creaked open. An older man peered out, hunched, with tired eyes behind thick glasses. Yes. His voice was cautious, guarded. Mr. Pierce? I asked. He nodded slowly. My name is Sally. Sally Montgomery. The words tasted strange. My stepfather's name, not my real one, not anymore. I need to talk to you about Richard. For a moment, his face went pale, his eyes darting past me like he was checking the street for shadows. I don't talk about that, he said, his voice shaky, starting to close the door. Please, I blurted, holding the edge. I just want the truth. My whole life I've been told he was guilty. But now I don't know what to believe. His eyes softened, just a fraction, and he sighed heavily. You'd better come inside. The house smelled faintly of dust and old paper. Stacks of files and boxes lined the corners, as though he'd been holding on to pieces of the past he couldn't let go of. We sat at a worn kitchen table. He poured himself a glass of water, his hands trembling slightly. You said your name's Montgomery, he said finally. That was Andrew's name. The man who... He stopped himself, his jaw tightening. My stepfather, I said quietly. He raised me. But Richard, he was my real father. For the first time, Harold looked directly at me. Then you deserve to know the truth. My pulse quickened. So he didn't do it? Harold rubbed his hands over his face, groaning. Richard was a good man. Honest. Too honest for his own good. He uncovered something. Money missing from the firm. He confronted Andrew about it. Next thing I know, Andrew's got me in his office, shoving papers in front of me, telling me what to say, what numbers to fix. My stomach dropped. You mean you helped frame him? Harold's eyes filled with shame. I didn't think I had a choice. Andrew was powerful, ruthless. Margaret backed him in everything. If I didn't play along, I'd have lost everything. And Richard went down for it. I sat there in stunned silence, the weight of his words pressing down on me. Do you still have those papers? I asked finally. Harold hesitated, then glanced at the stacks of boxes in the corner. Somewhere in there, maybe. I kept copies. Couldn't bring myself to throw them away. Hope sparked in my chest for the first time in days. Please, I whispered. If you find them, you could help clear his name. You could give me back my father. Harold's hands shook as he reached for the nearest box. It won't be easy, but maybe it's time the truth finally came out. Harold shuffled through the boxes stacked in his living room, muttering under his breath as dust swirled around us. I sat on the edge of my chair, my hands trembling in my lap, watching him dig through the wreckage of decades. You're sure it's here? I asked, my voice thin with impatience and hope. It should be, he replied, his back bent as he flipped through folders. I told myself I'd get rid of it one day, but I never could. Maybe part of me always knew someone like you would come knocking. The room was quiet except for the rustle of paper and the occasional creak of the old house settling. My heart pounded harder with each passing second. Then Harold froze. Slowly, he pulled out a worn leather-bound ledger, its cover cracked and faded with age. He set it on the table like it was fragile, sacred even. This, he whispered, sliding it toward me, is what Andrew didn't want anyone to see. I stared at it, my fingers hesitant before finally touching the cover. The leather was cool and smooth under my fingertips, and when I opened it, the neat columns of numbers hit me like a slap. Look here, Harold said, leaning in. He pointed to one page, then another. See the transfers? Money moved into Andrew's private accounts, disguised as company expenses. Richard caught these. He brought them to me, thinking we'd handle it together. But Andrew, his voice cracked, shame flashing across his face. Andrew threatened me. Said if I didn't adjust the books, I'd lose my career, my family, everything. I flipped through the pages, each one more damning than the last. The handwriting, the dates, the amounts, evidence of Andrew's betrayal written in black ink. This proves it, I breathed. Richard was innocent. Harold nodded, though his expression was heavy. But don't think Margaret won't fight you. She knows what Andrew did. She helped cover it up. A chill swept through me. Then why hasn't she destroyed this? Because she doesn't know it exists, Harold said. Andrew never trusted her completely. He gave me the originals to handle, and I kept these copies hidden. I closed the ledger, clutching it to my chest like a lifeline. This could change everything. Harold sighed, his shoulders slumping. Be careful, Sally. Margaret doesn't lose. And when she feels cornered, she's dangerous. Driving home, the ledger sat on the passenger seat, heavy with the weight of my family's buried sins. Every red light felt like a spotlight, every passing car like a threat. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half convinced Margaret had spies tailing me. By the time I pulled into the driveway, my nerves were frayed raw. I hurried inside, hiding the ledger in the bottom drawer of my desk before David came home. When he walked through the door an hour later, he looked worn out, his tie askew. Long day, he muttered, setting his briefcase down. But his eyes flicked to me, searching, like he knew something had shifted. You went somewhere today, he said cautiously. I swallowed. I told you I saw my mother. He tilted his head. And I forced a smile, but inside, panic clawed at me. Could I trust him with the truth? He was Margaret's son, after all. She still had her claws in him. Nothing important, I lied, kissing his cheek quickly before retreating upstairs. That night, while David showered, I sat at the desk, pulling the ledger out again. The numbers blurred in the dim light, but one detail leapt out, an entry dated the same week Richard had been arrested. A transfer labeled settlement funds, but the account number wasn't Richard's. It was Andrew's. The ledger wasn't just proof. It was a roadmap, and I was going to follow it. But Margaret was quicker than I thought. 2 days later, she appeared at our door unannounced again. This time, her smile was tighter, her eyes sharper. Sally, she said sweetly, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. I hope I'm not intruding. I stiffened. What do you want, Margaret? Her gaze lingered on me, unblinking, like a predator sizing up prey. I just wanted to check in. You've seemed restless lately. Distracted. Makes me wonder what you've been up to. My throat went dry. Did she know? Had someone followed me to Harold's? David tried to smooth things over. Mother, please. Sally doesn't need. But she cut him off with a wave of her hand, her eyes never leaving mine. Careful, Sally. When you dig into the past, you might not like what you find. The words were delivered with her usual elegance, but I heard the warning beneath them. And as she left, the echo of her heels clicking against the floor, I realized something terrifying. Margaret didn't know I was digging. Somehow she always knew. That night, as I locked the desk drawer with the ledger inside, I whispered to myself, "You're not taking this from me. Not this time." But deep down, I wasn't sure how long I could keep it hidden. I couldn't sleep that night. The discovery of the listening device was already enough to rattle my nerves. But what David confessed about Andrew, that his father had a hidden side no one dared to question, kept echoing in my mind. By morning, I had decided. If Andrew had built his empire on lies, if Richard, my biological father, had been framed, then I had to find proof. Without it, everything would remain a tangled web of rumors and accusations. David surprised me when he agreed. "I'll help you," he said quietly over coffee, his eyes downcast. "I can't erase what my family has done, but maybe I can stop it from swallowing us whole." It was the first time in weeks he looked at me like a partner instead of an adversary. Our first step was the old company storage facility. Andrew had kept meticulous records, but not all of them made it into the official archives. There were whispers of a personal accountant, someone Andrew trusted implicitly, who had disappeared when things got messy. The warehouse was cold, filled with dust and shadows. David and I dug through rows of file boxes stacked so high they looked like walls closing in. Hours passed. Just when I thought it was hopeless, I spotted a box pushed far into the corner, sealed with brittle tape and marked only with a faded R. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside were old ledgers, pages upon pages of numbers, entries, and signatures. And there, in neat handwriting, was Richard's name, connected to transactions he supposedly authorized. But something was off. "These dates," I whispered, running my finger along the page. "Richard couldn't have signed these. He was already suspended from the company at that time." David leaned closer. "Look here." The handwriting changes mid-page. "See? It's forged." The realization hit me like a tidal wave. Andrew hadn't just framed Richard, he'd manufactured the evidence. I clutched the ledger to my chest, the weight of it pressing against my heart. For the first time, I had something solid. Something that could tear down the facade Margaret had spent years protecting. But with that came fear. If Margaret found out I had this, she wouldn't just attack me in whispers and condescending remarks. She'd come at me full force, and David knew it too. "We can't keep this here," he said firmly. "If my mother even suspects..." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. We agreed to hide the ledger somewhere safe until we could figure out our next move. But that night, as I tried to rest, unease gnawed at me. For every answer I uncovered, a new question emerged. Why had Sarah, my mother, kept silent all these years if she knew Andrew was behind Richard's downfall? Why spy on me instead of telling me outright? And why did David suddenly seem so eager to help when days ago he stood at his mother's side? The next morning, I decided to confront Sarah again. She opened the door before I even knocked, as if she'd been waiting for me. Her eyes flickered to the bag I carried, where the ledger was carefully tucked away. "You found it," she said, almost to herself. My heart skipped. "You knew." Sarah stepped aside and motioned me in. "I suspected." Andrew covered his tracks well, but not perfectly. That ledger was the one thing I prayed you'd never see. Because once you hold it, Sally, there's no turning back. Her words chilled me. "What do you mean?" Sarah's gaze softened, but her voice carried weight. "Exposing Andrew means ripping open wounds that never healed. Margaret won't go down quietly. She'll destroy anyone who threatens the legacy he left behind. That includes you, and David too." I wanted to argue, but I couldn't ignore the fear laced through her tone. Still, as I held the ledger tighter, I knew there was no going back for me. Whatever the cost, Richard deserved justice. And so did I. That night, I returned home to find the living room lamp knocked over, the drawers pulled open, papers scattered. My chest tightened. Someone had been inside. David rushed in moments later, pale and breathless. I just got a call. Mom's lawyer showed up at her house tonight. She knows, Sally. She knows we've found something. I gripped the ledger tighter, a cold realization sinking in. The war had officially begun. I didn't get much sleep that night. Even with the tiny listening device in my hand like a war trophy, my nerves wouldn't settle. I kept replaying my conversation with Mom, Sarah, in my head. The way her eyes had shimmered with guilt, the way her voice cracked when she admitted she'd planted the device under Margaret's orders. It was a truth so twisted it almost didn't feel real. By morning, I had made a decision. I needed to face Margaret directly. No more quiet suspicion. No more letting her dictate the rules of this toxic game. When David left for work, promising to call me later, I drove to Margaret's house. Her sprawling estate loomed like a fortress. Walking up the perfectly manicured driveway, I almost turned back. But then I thought of the way she smirked at me every time she implied I wasn't good enough. I thought of Mom's trembling hands. I thought of Richard, the father I never knew, rotting in prison for a crime he might not have even committed. No, I wasn't turning back. Margaret opened the door before I could even knock. She was dressed immaculately, as always, in one of her expensive silk blouses, her pearls sitting neatly on her neck. Her eyes narrowed when she saw me. Well, she said coolly, I wasn't expecting company this early. To what do I owe that intrusion? Cut the act, Margaret, I said, holding the bug between my fingers like evidence in a courtroom. I know everything. About this. About how you've been spying on me. About how you dragged my mother into it. For a flicker of a second, I saw something behind her eyes, surprise, maybe even fear. But then it vanished, replaced by that smug superiority she wore like a second skin. My, she said, her voice dripping with false amusement. So you've finally grown a spine. Why? My voice trembled, but I forced myself to meet her gaze. Why would you go this far? Planting bugs in our house? Turning my mother against me? Margaret stepped aside, motioning me in. Come in, Sally. You're making quite the scene on my porch. And you wouldn't want the neighbors to start gossiping, would you? I walked inside, every nerve in my body on edge. Her house smelled faintly of lavender polish, the kind that clung to old wood furniture. Everything about the place screamed control and perfection, just like her. Once we were in the sitting room, she folded her hands neatly in her lap and leaned back. You make it sound so sinister, she said. I wasn't spying on you. I was protecting my son. I almost laughed. Protecting him? By listening in on his private life? By trying to control our marriage? David is naive, she said coldly. He trusts too easily. He doesn't always see when someone is unsuitable. Her eyes darted to me like daggers. I've had to intervene before. And I will again if necessary. The gall of this woman. You ruined my father's life, I said suddenly, the words rushing out before I could stop them. Her expression froze. For the first time, Margaret looked caught off guard. Excuse me. I know about Richard, I pressed. I know Andrew framed him. And you stood by and let it happen. Didn't you? The silence in the room was deafening. Margaret's lips pressed into a thin line, and I could practically hear the wheels turning in her head. Finally, she let out a sharp laugh. Your mother's been busy, hasn't she? Feeding you fairy tales and half-truths. It's not a fairy tale if I've seen proof. I thought of the ledger tucked safely in my bag at home, the one Mom had given me. You can deny it all you want, but the truth is coming out. Margaret leaned forward, her voice dropping into a chilling whisper. Be very careful, Sally. You have no idea the damage you could do by digging into the past. Andrew may be gone, but his legacy is not. And if you think David will stand by you once you drag his father's name through the mud, you're sorely mistaken. Her words hit me like a slap. But I forced myself not to flinch. If David loves me, he'll want the truth. And if he doesn't, then maybe I don't want this marriage on your terms. Her eyes narrowed dangerously. Do you really want to gamble with your future, dear? With your mother's safety? With your marriage? Walk away from this, and life can go back to normal. Push forward, and you'll lose everything. My chest tightened, but I stood anyway. You don't scare me, Margaret. Not anymore. I walked out of her house before she could reply, but her threat clung to me all the way home like a shadow. For the first time, I understood just how ruthless she could be and how much I stood to lose. That night, David noticed my silence over dinner. "You okay?" he asked gently. I looked at him across the table, my heart aching. How could I tell him that his own mother had just threatened to destroy us? That the battle lines were drawn, and he was the one person I wasn't sure which side would choose? Instead, I just smiled faintly. "Yeah, I'm fine." But inside, I wasn't fine. Not at all. When I pulled the old leather-bound book from Sarah's hands, my stomach dropped. It looked ordinary enough, age-cracked, the kind of ledger you'd expect to find in an accountant's dusty office. But the way my mother held it, like it carried the weight of life and death, told me this wasn't just another relic from the past. "This," she whispered, brushing the worn cover with her fingertips, "is what Andrew never wanted anyone to see." Andrew. My stepfather. The man who raised me as his own, who I thought was steady and protective. The man I'd learned, just days ago, might have orchestrated the destruction of my real father, Richard. My throat tightened. "What's inside?" I asked, though a part of me already knew. Sarah opened it gently. The yellowed pages were filled with neat handwriting, numbers aligned in careful columns, some sections marked with red ink. At first glance, it was just numbers, but Sarah leaned closer, tapping her finger on one page. "Look here. Withdrawals. Transfers. Shell companies. All funneled through Richard's name." Andrew made it look like Richard had been skimming millions from the company when really, she paused, her lips trembling. It was Andrew all along. The air around me seemed to shrink. My chest grew heavy. Richard hadn't been the thief. He had been framed. My real father, dragged through the mud, disgraced, abandoned, because Andrew wanted to protect his empire and his reputation. I sank into the couch, pressing a hand to my mouth. So all this time, everyone thought Richard was guilty, and Andrew let him take the fall. Sarah's eyes brimmed with tears. He didn't just let him. He made sure of it. He planted evidence, paid off witnesses, and used Margaret to destroy whatever was left of Richard's credibility. They made him a ghost. Margaret. Of course. That explained why she despised me, why she never wanted me near her son. I wasn't just the outsider wife who wasn't good enough. I was Richard's daughter, a living reminder of the man her husband had ruined. The rage rose like a tide inside me. My hands shook as I flipped through the ledger. Every page screamed of lies, betrayal, theft, not just of money, but of truth, of lives. But then fear crept in. If this ledger proved Andrew's crimes, what would Margaret do if she found out we had it? She already despised me, already planted microphones in my home, already twisted David against me. This would send her into war. "I can't just keep this here," I said, snapping the book shut. "If Margaret gets her hands on it, she'll bury it. Just like she buried Richard's reputation. I need to protect it." Sarah hesitated. "And use it, Sally. You can clear Richard's name. You can show David the truth. You can finally put Margaret where she belongs." Her words lit something inside me. Hope, sharp and dangerous. But also doubt. David. Would he believe me? Or would he think I was spinning more lies to pit him against his mother? That night, I sat alone in my room with the ledger open on my lap, the lamp casting a golden glow across the pages. My heart ached as I imagined Richard, accused and powerless, with no way to fight back. I'd never met him, he had been gone before I was old enough to understand, but suddenly I felt close to him. Connected. Like he was here, whispering, "Don't let Tem win." I traced my finger across the ink. Proof. Hard evidence. Enough to shake the foundations of everything Margaret built. But evidence was only as strong as the one willing to wield it. The next morning, I tucked the ledger into my bag and headed out, determined to find someone who could verify its authenticity. That's when I remembered Harold. He had been Andrew's accountant once. He was old now, living quietly in the next town over. If anyone could confirm these numbers weren't just scribbles, it would be him. David asked where I was going, but I brushed him off with a vague excuse about errands. His eyes lingered on me, suspicious, but I didn't stop. I couldn't risk him warning Margaret before I had the truth locked down. When Harold opened the door, he looked startled to see me. Bent with age, glasses perched on his nose, but his mind sharp as a blade. "Sally." His voice quivered. "You look just like your father." The words hit me like a punch. My father. Not Andrew. Richard. I showed him the ledger. His hands trembled as he flipped through the pages. A bitter laugh escaped his lips. "So, it survived." "What do you mean?" I asked quickly. "I kept copies," Harold admitted. "Back then, I knew Andrew was dirty, but I couldn't fight him. He was powerful, dangerous. So I left. I hoped the truth would come out someday." His eyes welled up. "But this ledger, this is the nail in the coffin. It's everything." Relief flooded me. At last, validation. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't imagining this. Richard had been innocent. But then Harold's voice dropped. "Be careful, Sally. Margaret will fight like a cornered animal when she realizes what you have. She's lost too much already to let you strip her of her last illusion, that Andrew was a good man." As I left Harold's home, the weight of the ledger pressed against my side like a loaded weapon. I wasn't just holding a book. I was holding a bomb. And sooner or later, Margaret would know it was in my hands. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, all I could hear was David's voice, low and tense, repeating what he had overheard Margaret say, that Andrew had done what needed to be done to silence Richard forever. My chest felt heavy, like I was suffocating under layers of lies that had been carefully stacked over the years. By morning, my body moved on autopilot. I brewed coffee, not because I wanted any, but because the act of doing something normal kept me from falling apart. David sat at the table, his hands wrapped around his mug like it was his anchor. He looked at me cautiously, as though he was afraid of what I'd say next. "Did you hear it clearly?" I asked, my voice cracking despite my best efforts to steady it. David nodded. "She didn't mention your father by name, but, Sally, she was talking about him. About Richard." "I know it." I closed my eyes, fighting the rush of emotions that threatened to drown me. Rage. Sadness. Betrayal. But beneath all of it was something else, resolve. If Andrew had framed Richard, and Margaret knew about it, then maybe there was more proof out there. Proof that could finally clear his name. "I need answers," I said firmly. "Not half-truths. Not whispers. Solid answers. And I think I know where to start." David frowned. "Where?" "The ledger," I whispered. "Every scheme leaves a paper trail. If Andrew cooked up this framing, he didn't do it alone. Someone kept the books." That's how I found myself later that day driving out to the edge of town to visit a man named Harold Whitmore. He used to be Andrew's accountant years ago, a quiet man who had all but disappeared after Andrew's death. My mother had mentioned his name once offhandedly when I was a teenager, but I never thought much of it then. When Harold opened the door, he looked like life had worn him thin. His hair was mostly gone, and his shoulders were hunched as though the weight of old secrets still pressed down on him. "You're Andrew's stepdaughter," he said after a long pause, studying my face like he was searching for shadows of the past. I nodded. "And Richard's daughter." At the mention of my father, something flickered in his eyes. Guilt, maybe. Fear, definitely. "What do you want from me?" he asked. "The truth," I said simply. "I know Andrew framed Richard. I know Margaret helped cover it up. But I can't prove it without your help. Please." Harold's hands trembled as he motioned me inside. His house smelled faintly of old paper and dust, the kind of place where secrets went to sleep. He led me to a cluttered back room where stacks of boxes leaned precariously against the walls. He pulled out a worn, leather-bound ledger and set it on the table between us. "I should have burned this years ago," he muttered. "But I couldn't. Not after what happened to Richard. He didn't deserve that." My breath caught as I flipped open the ledger. Inside were pages and pages of neat handwriting, transactions, transfers, accounts that led nowhere but circled back to Andrew's name in subtle, careful ways. But it wasn't just numbers. Scribbled notes ran alongside them, shorthand that looked meaningless until Harold explained. "See this?" He pointed at one line. "This money was shifted into an account in Richard's name. but he never touched it. Andrew set him up, made it look like he was embezzling funds from the company. The proof was there, staring me in the face. My father had been innocent all along. I felt tears sting my eyes as I closed the ledger gently, like it was something fragile. "Why didn't you come forward?" I asked Harold. He shook his head. I was scared. Andrew had power connections. And Margaret, she knew how to ruin people. If I had spoken up back then, I would have lost everything. Maybe even my life. His words made my skin crawl. It was one thing to suspect Margaret's cruelty. It was another to hear it confirmed by someone who had lived in her shadow. David placed a hand on my shoulder, steadying me. "We'll use this," he said. "We'll make it right." But Harold wasn't done. His voice lowered as he leaned closer. "Be careful, Sally. Margaret doesn't just protect Andrew's legacy. She controls it. And if she thinks you're coming after it, she won't stop at words or threats. She'll come for you." I left Harold's house with the ledger clutched tightly in my arms, my mind spinning. Part of me wanted to run straight to Margaret's doorstep and throw the truth in her face. But the wiser part of me, the one that had survived her cold smirks and cutting words all these years, knew I needed to be smarter than that. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about my father's name. About justice. About finally pulling the mask off Margaret's carefully constructed world. When David and I got back home, I locked the ledger in a drawer in my study. For the first time in years, I felt like I had something powerful in my hands. Something Margaret couldn't spin or twist. But even as I sat there, staring at that drawer, a chill ran down my spine. Because Harold's warning echoed in my mind. Margaret knew how to destroy people. And now that I had the truth, I realized something terrifying. She'd be coming for me next. The silence at the dinner table was the kind that prickled against my skin, the kind that warned you something explosive was waiting to be said. Margaret sat at the head, perfectly composed in her royal blue blouse, pearls shining under the chandelier. David sat stiff beside me, his jaw tight, his fork untouched. I, on the other hand, was forcing myself to swallow bites of food that felt like sawdust. Margaret cleared her throat delicately, setting down her wine glass. "Here it comes. You know," she began, her voice dripping with the kind of politeness that wasn't polite at all. "It's such a shame that certain people have been stirring up baseless rumors about my late husband. It tarnishes not just his memory, but this entire family's reputation." Her gaze cut toward me like a dagger, though her lips curved in a faint smile. David shifted in his chair. "Mother, let's not." "No, David." She lifted her hand, silencing him. "I won't sit quietly while lies are spread. Andrew was an honorable man. The suggestion that he framed someone, or that he was involved in embezzlement, is absurd." My chest burned, but I forced myself to meet her eyes. "It's not absurd if there's evidence." Margaret's smile widened brittle. "Evidence? You mean that shabby little ledger your mother dredged up from some forgotten attic? Do you really expect anyone to believe such nonsense?" The table went cold. David's hand twitched beside his plate, as though he wanted to reach for mine but couldn't bring himself to do it. I took a steadying breath. It's not just a ledger. It's corroborated by names, dates, transactions. I've cross-checked it. It all points to Andrew, and how he made sure Richard, my father, took the fall for his crimes. The words hung in the air like gun smoke. For a split second, I thought Margaret's expression faltered, but she quickly regained composure. She leaned back, folding her hands neatly. "Ah, yes. Your father, the man who abandoned you, wasn't it? The man who went to prison and left you to be raised by your mother and Andrew? My dear, don't you see? You're clinging to fantasies because you can't accept that Richard was guilty." I nearly dropped my fork. My pulse roared in my ears. He didn't abandon me. He was locked away for something he didn't do. And Andrew knew it. David finally slammed his palm against the table. The sound startled even me. "Enough. Both of you." His voice cracked with the weight of it. He glanced at me, then his mother, torn between loyalty and truth. Margaret's voice softened, deceptively sweet. "David, darling, you mustn't let her poison you against your own blood. She's desperate to drag our name through the mud. She'll say anything." I couldn't stay seated anymore. I pushed back my chair, my body trembling. You've lived your whole life wrapped in Andrew's lies, Margaret. But guess what? I'm done being silent. People will know the truth, whether you like it or not. Her eyes narrowed, her mask slipping for the briefest moment. Careful, Sally. Words like that can destroy families. Families are destroyed by betrayal, not by truth, I shot back, my voice shaking. The air was suffocating. I couldn't breathe in that room, not with her venom dripping from every word, not with David paralyzed between us. So I turned and walked out, my heels striking the marble floor like the beat of war drums. David followed me into the hallway. Sally, wait. His voice was low, urgent. I spun to face him. Do you believe me? Or do you think I'm making all of this up like she does? He rubbed the back of his neck, anguish written across his face. I don't know what to believe. I grew up idolizing my father. And my mother, she's always been strong, unyielding. But you, Sally, his voice cracked. You wouldn't fight this hard if you weren't sure. I know that much. Tears welled in my eyes, hot and stinging. David, I need you on my side. I can't do this alone. Not when she's trying to crush me at every turn. He reached for my hand then, squeezing it hard. I don't have all the answers yet. But I promise you, I won't let her destroy you. Not again. Something inside me loosened at his words. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I wasn't completely alone. But as I looked back toward the dining room, where Margaret still sat like a queen on her throne, sipping her wine as though nothing had happened, I knew this was only the beginning. Her war against me was far from over, and the next battle would be uglier than anything yet. I didn't sleep that night. The ledger sat on the kitchen counter like a loaded gun, and every time I looked at it, I felt both terrified and empowered. It was proof, not just of my stepfather Andrew's guilt, but of Margaret's lies, the poison she'd been feeding me, feeding David, feeding the entire family for years. But proof meant nothing if it never saw the light of day. And Margaret wasn't the type to let me expose her without a fight. The next morning, I walked into the kitchen and found David leaning over the counter, staring at the ledger. He hadn't touched it, just stood there with his hands pressed against the marble like it was all too heavy for him to carry. You didn't sleep either, I said softly. He looked up at me, dark circles under his eyes. I kept thinking about all the times I defended her. All the times I let her tear you apart. God, Sally, what have I done? His voice cracked, and for the first time in years, I saw the boyish guilt on his face, the one he wore when we were still in college and he'd forgotten an anniversary or said something stupid. But this was different. This was heavier. I walked up to him, placing my hand on his arm. You believed the person you trusted the most. You believed your mother. How could you have known? He shook his head. Because you told me. Over and over again, you told me how she twisted things. And I didn't listen. He exhaled shakily. I let her poison us. His words were a balm I hadn't realized I needed. I squeezed his hand. Then maybe it's time we stop letting her. We both knew what that meant. Confrontation. By noon, Margaret was already circling. Literally. She showed up at the house uninvited, carrying a pie like she was some wholesome mother-in-law from a sitcom. But I knew better. That pie was her Trojan horse. Sally, she said sweetly when I opened the door. I thought I'd bring something over. You've been looking pale lately. Stress doesn't suit you. I wanted to laugh at the audacity. Instead, I stepped aside. Come in. David gave me a wary glance from the living room, but I nodded. This was it. Time to test the waters. Margaret placed the pie carefully on the counter, then looked around the kitchen like she owned it. Her eyes landed on the ledger. For a split second, just a flicker, her face dropped. But she recovered quickly, plastering on that same smile. What's this? She asked, walking toward it with a feigned casualness. I moved quicker, sliding the ledger off the counter and holding it against my chest. Family history, I said evenly. Her eyes narrowed, and the sweetness slipped. I see. David cleared his throat, stepping closer. His voice was tight, controlled, but furious. How long were you planning on keeping this from me, Mom? Margaret froze. Keeping what from you? The truth about Andrew, David snapped. The truth about Sally's father. About everything. For the first time, I saw Margaret falter. Her lips parted, but no words came out. She wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by her son. "I don't know what she's told you," Margaret finally said, her tone sharpening as she glanced at me. "But you can't trust her. She's manipulative. Always has been. Just like her mother." That did it. My blood boiled. "You can spin this however you want, Margaret, but the ledger doesn't lie. And neither does the man who gave it to me. Your husband framed my father, and you've been living off that lie ever since." Margaret's mask cracked, just for a heartbeat. Her jaw tightened, her nostrils flared, but she quickly composed herself. "Even if that were true," she said coldly, "no one would believe you. Do you really think anyone will take the word of a bitter woman and an old, senile accountant over me?" Her words cut, but they also revealed something important. Fear. She was trying to scare me into silence because she knew I had power now. David stepped between us. "Don't you dare talk to her like that." "Not anymore." The silence that followed was deafening. Margaret's face hardened, and for the first time, she didn't look like the powerful matriarch who always controlled the room. She looked cornered. "Be careful, David," she hissed. "She'll ruin you too." Then she turned on her heel and stormed out, the door slamming behind her. The moment she was gone, I collapsed into a chair, trembling. "She's not going to let this go," I whispered. David sat across from me, his expression grim. "No, she won't. But neither will we." And in that moment, I realized the shift had already begun. For the first time, David was standing on my side, not Margaret's. And together, we might finally have the strength to bring her down. But deep down, I knew Margaret wasn't finished. She was regrouping. And the next time she struck, it would be even harder, sharper, more dangerous. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I barely slept that night. My thoughts kept circling around the discovery of the ledger, the coded numbers, and the cold reality that Margaret had known all along about Andrew's schemes. The shadows of my bedroom seemed heavier, almost suffocating, as if the walls themselves carried the weight of unspoken truths. By morning, my resolve had sharpened. David noticed it instantly as we sat across from each other at breakfast. His eyes, bloodshot from lack of sleep, searched mine for an answer. "What's next, Sally?" he asked softly, his voice laced with hesitation. I pushed my coffee mug aside. "The ledger proves Andrew orchestrated everything. But numbers alone won't win this fight. We need someone who can explain what they mean, someone who was there." David nodded slowly. "And you think Robert will talk?" Robert, the family's old accountant. The one whose meticulous handwriting filled those pages. The one Andrew had fired abruptly before his death. "Yes," I said firmly. "He's the missing piece." David leaned back, his jaw tightening. "If Robert talks, it'll destroy Margaret's legacy. She's built her entire life around Andrew being untouchable." "Good," I shot back, the bitterness surprising even me. "Because she destroyed mine." Finding Robert wasn't hard. A few discreet calls later, I learned he lived in a quiet neighborhood 2 towns over. Retired, living alone, nursing his health and his guilt, according to a neighbor who spoke too freely on the phone. As David drove us there that afternoon, the silence between us was dense. The road stretched out endlessly, framed by bare winter trees. I could feel David's fingers tapping against the steering wheel, his nerves betraying him. "You're sure about this?" he finally asked. "Yes," I whispered, staring at the horizon. "For once, I need to hear the truth from someone who isn't spinning it." Robert answered the door after the 3rd knock. He was older than I remembered, thinner, his face lined with exhaustion. His eyes, however, still carried that sharpness I remembered from childhood visits to his office, the eyes of a man who noticed everything. "Sally?" he asked, his voice wavering. "Yes," I said. "We need to talk." "About Andrew." "About the ledger." The mention of Andrew's name made his shoulders tense. He glanced past me at David, then motioned us inside. His home was modest, filled with old photographs and stacks of paperwork. The air smelled faintly of dust and lemon polish. We sat at his dining table, where a pot of tea steamed gently. Robert folded his hands. I knew this day would come. I just didn't know it would be you. I placed the ledger on the table, watching his eyes widen as he recognized his own handwriting. His fingers trembled slightly as he traced the lines. "Where did you get this?" he asked. "My mother," I answered cautiously. He closed his eyes, exhaling a long, heavy sigh. I tried to fight him. I tried to warn people. But Andrew, he had too much power, too many connections. When I threatened to go public, he ruined me. Took away everything. My career, my reputation. I was branded as incompetent. And my father? My voice cracked. Richard. Robert's eyes softened with sorrow. He was innocent. Andrew needed a scapegoat, and Richard was the perfect target, brilliant, ambitious, but not ruthless enough to fight back. Margaret stood by Andrew, helped paint Richard as a thief. I regret every day that I didn't stand louder, fight harder. The words hit me like a hammer, but they also steadied me. This wasn't just suspicion anymore. It was confirmation. My father hadn't been the villain. I had been raised in a web of lies. David leaned forward. "If you're willing to testify, Robert, this could change everything." Robert hesitated. His frail hands clutched the edge of the table. "Margaret won't go down without a fight. You must know that. She'll drag you both through the mud, worse than she already has." "I don't care," I said firmly. "I want the truth to finally see daylight." We spent hours with Robert, going over every page of the ledger, every memory he could recall. He spoke of secret meetings, hidden accounts, and deals that tied Andrew's hands to some of the city's most powerful families. His words painted a picture of corruption, so deep it made my stomach churn. When we finally left, dusk had fallen. The street lamps flickered on as we walked back to the car. My hands were shaking, but for the first time in weeks, I felt something like clarity. David opened the car door for me, his face unreadable. "You know, once we start this, there's no turning back." "I know," I said quietly, sliding into the seat. "But I can't keep living in the shadows of their lies." As the engine started and the headlights cut through the dark, I realized something. Margaret's war with me wasn't just about pride or power. It was about survival. And I had just found the weapon that could end it all. But I also knew, the closer I got to the truth, the more dangerous this game would become. When I woke the next morning, my mind was heavy with thoughts of last night's discoveries. David had fallen asleep on the couch after another long day, his guilt riding him like a shadow. I stood by the window with the ledger in my hands, the paper worn and fragile, yet stronger than any words Margaret could throw at me. This book was more than evidence. It was the truth that could finally free Richard, my father, from decades of shame. But even with this weapon, I felt like a soldier about to walk into enemy territory without knowing where the landmines were buried. I slipped the ledger into a hidden compartment in my dresser drawer, then made coffee. My phone buzzed. It was Sarah. Her voice was calmer than the last time we spoke, but a nervous edge bled through every syllable. "Have you thought about what to do with the ledger?" she asked. "I don't know yet," I admitted. "If we go public, Margaret will spin it. If we go to the police, they'll bury it under red tape. I need something solid." "Then maybe it's time you talk to someone who lived through it," Sarah said softly. "There are people who knew Andrew's dealings. They stayed quiet out of fear, but they're still around." Her words gnawed at me long after we hung up. If there were others, I needed to find them. But how? Margaret had spent years burying Richard's name, burning bridges, silencing witnesses, tightening her grip. I didn't realize I had been staring off into space until David touched my shoulder. His eyes were puffy, tired, but sincere. "Let me help you," he whispered. For the first time, I believed him. Maybe guilt had cracked him open. Maybe love was finally fighting its way through his blind loyalty to his mother. Whatever the reason, I needed him. So, I told him everything Sarah said. David frowned, rubbing his temples. There was a man, Mr. Collins. He worked under my father. I remember him showing up drunk once at our house when I was a kid. He shouted that Andrew had ruined his life. I haven't thought about him in years. Where is he now? I asked quickly. David shook his head. I don't know, but I can find out. And just like that, a thread appeared in the tangled knot of lies. 2 days later, David tracked him down, living in a small, peeling apartment building on the edge of town. His name was Gregory Collins, once a mid-level accountant in Andrew's company. I convinced David to let me go alone. If he sees you, he'll clam up, I explained. You carry the family name, whether you want to or not. When I knocked, the door creaked open slowly. A man with hollow cheeks and watery eyes peered at me. His clothes hung loose. His breath reeked of whiskey. But when I mentioned Andrew's name, something sharp flickered across his face. You've got 5 minutes, he muttered, ushering me inside. The apartment was cluttered with stacks of old papers, bills, and faded photographs. It smelled like dust and regret. I know Andrew framed Richard, I said without hesitation. I have part of the ledger, but I need someone who was there to tell the truth. Gregory froze. His fingers trembled as he lit a cigarette. I should have spoken up years ago. Richard, he didn't deserve it. Andrew was stealing, funneling money through fake accounts, and when the walls closed in, he needed a scapegoat. Richard was too honest, too trusting. Easy prey. My heart pounded. Hearing someone else say it out loud was like breathing for the first time. Why didn't you speak up then? I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. He exhaled smoke, his eyes haunted. Because Andrew had leverage. On all of us. He knew secrets, debts, affairs, weaknesses. If we tried to cross him, he'd ruin us. And he had Margaret to back him up. That woman's tongue is sharper than any blade. The bitterness in his tone carried decades of pain. Would you testify now? I asked, leaning forward. He gave me a broken laugh. Testify? Against Andrew's widow, the matriarch of the wealthy Stanton name? No one would listen. They'd say I'm a drunk trying to rewrite history. Not if I have proof, I said firmly. The ledger matches your story. And if I can find others. Gregory's eyes softened just a fraction. He stubbed out his cigarette and whispered, then maybe it's time. Richard deserves his name back. When I left his apartment, the air outside felt different, charged, alive. For the first time, I wasn't just clinging to scraps of truth. I had someone willing to speak, someone who could stand beside me when the storm hit. But as I drove home, unease curled in my stomach. Because if Gregory was willing to talk, Margaret would catch wind of it. And if there was one thing I knew about her, it was this: she'd burn the world before she let her empire of lies collapse. When I got home, I tucked my keys into the bowl by the door and froze. The ledger was sitting on the coffee table. I knew I hadn't left it there. My blood went cold. Someone had been inside the house, and they wanted me to know it. I never thought silence could be so loud. After Mark's shocking attempt to blackmail my father and the explosive scene that followed, the entire household seemed to exist in a fragile, almost unbearable stillness. The air carried the heaviness of unspoken words, secrets that lingered at the edges of every conversation, daring to spill over. My father, who had always been my source of stability, looked different now, haunted. His usual sharpness dulled, his steps slower, his gaze heavy as if Mark's words had unsettled something deep inside him. I caught him staring out of windows for long stretches, lost in thoughts he didn't share. Dad, I said one evening, my voice hesitant as I sat across from him at the dining table. The clink of my spoon against the soup bowl echoed too loudly in the quiet. You've been off. Is there something Mark said that's true? He froze, the spoon halfway to his lips. For a fleeting second, I saw guilt flicker in his eyes, raw, naked, and terrifying. Then he looked away, sighing deeply. Not everything needs to be answered, Karine, he muttered. But that was an answer in itself. I wanted to press, to demand clarity, but before I could, Aunt Flora entered the room, her presence as unwelcome as always. She leaned against the doorframe with that smug smile that had begun to crawl under my skin like a splinter. Secrets have a way of rotting families from the inside, she said lightly, as though commenting on the weather. But then again, that's something your father should already know, isn't it? Flora, Dad snapped, his voice low and sharp. Enough. She only shrugged, her grin widening, as though she'd won some invisible battle. I realized then that Mark wasn't the only one with leverage. Flora seemed to know more than she let on, and it was tearing us apart piece by piece. Austin, meanwhile, had become my only refuge. His quiet strength was a balm I didn't know I needed. He didn't push, didn't demand explanations, just let me sit with my thoughts when the house became too suffocating. One afternoon, we sat on the porch together, the sun painting the sky in strokes of gold and crimson. "You look like you're carrying the weight of the world," he said gently. "Maybe I am," I admitted, staring at the horizon. "Everything feels like it's slipping away. My father, the truth, my family. And Flora, she's like poison. She twists everything." He reached for my hand, his touch steady, grounding. "Sometimes the truth is uglier than the lies we've been fed. But it's better to face it than let it control you." His words hit deeper than I expected. Was I brave enough to face the truth, no matter how devastating it might be? The breaking point came that night. I woke to hushed voices drifting through the corridor. At first, I thought it was another of Flora's late-night manipulations, but then I heard my father's voice, low and raw. "You don't understand, Flora. If Karine finds out, it will destroy her." "She deserves to know," Flora hissed back. "You can't hide forever. Secrets don't die just because you bury them." My heart thudded against my ribs as I pressed closer to the wall, straining to hear. "She is my daughter." Dad's voice cracked, filled with a desperation that shook me to my core. "And what about me?" Flora's retort cut like a knife. "What about the part one played in all of this? Or don't you think she deserves to know that too?" The words were a puzzle, jagged pieces that didn't fit yet, but I knew one thing for certain. My life was built on lies, and I was standing on the edge of a cliff about to crumble. As their footsteps faded, I slipped back into my room, my body trembling. I wanted to scream, to demand answers immediately, but something told me the truth wasn't ready to be revealed just yet. And neither was I ready to face it. The next morning, I tried to act normal, but Austin noticed my unease instantly. "What happened?" he asked, his brow furrowed. I swallowed hard. "I think my father's hiding something about me. And Flora's in on it." His eyes darkened with concern. "Karine, whatever it is, you need to be prepared. Families have a way of breaking you when you least expect it." I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Aunt Flora's face, haunted, pained, but also oddly relieved, as if the truth she'd revealed had lifted a heavy burden. Her words replayed in my mind over and over. "Your father's silence wasn't weakness. It was love. He was protecting you from me, from myself, from a past I wasn't ready to face." Morning sunlight crept through my thin curtains, and I sat on my bed, staring at the ceiling. My world had shifted again. Just when I thought I understood the cracks in my family's story, new ones opened, revealing deeper fractures beneath. I dragged myself to class, though I couldn't focus. My law professor's voice faded into background noise as my thoughts swirled. Every instinct in me wanted to storm back into Flora's house and demand every last detail, but part of me feared the answers. What if there was more darkness waiting? What if, in chasing the truth, I ended up breaking myself apart? By the time I left campus, I felt hollow, like a shadow of myself. That's when I saw Austin waiting by the gate. His familiar figure, tall, calm, composed despite his blindness, was like an anchor in a storm. "I thought you might skip today," he said softly, sensing me before I even spoke. "How could you tell?" I tried to smile, but my voice cracked. "Your footsteps," he replied, tilting his head. "They're heavier. Like you're carrying something you shouldn't have to." Tears stung my eyes, but I blinked them away. "Austin, everything feels like a lie. My father, my aunt, my own history. I don't know what to believe anymore." He didn't push me to explain. Instead, he offered me his arm. "Walk with me. Sometimes the ground feels steadier when you're not walking it alone." We ended up back at his house, in the quiet safety of his library. The scent of old books wrapped around me like a blanket. For a long moment, I just sat there, watching him run his fingers across the spines, his movements deliberate, comforting. "You know," he began, breaking the silence, "lies are like cobwebs. They cling to everything, no matter how much you try to sweep them away. But truth is like light. It cuts through, even if it hurts the eyes at first." I looked at him, startled by the precision of his words. "Do you think my aunt has told me the full truth?" "No," he said without hesitation. "Not yet. People rarely give it all at once. They test you with pieces to see if you can handle it. A chill ran through me. He was right. Flora hadn't told me everything. I could feel it in her pauses, in the way her voice broke but then stitched itself back together. Just then, his father David appeared in the doorway. His presence was always commanding, but today his eyes, so piercing, so controlled, lingered on me longer than usual. "You're here again," he said, not unkindly, but with a weight that made my stomach flip. "Yes," I answered, my voice quiet. "Austin, he helps me breathe when everything feels too heavy." David's gaze softened almost imperceptibly. "That's what family should do." Unfortunately, not all families remember that. His words struck something in me. He was right. My family had forgotten what it meant to hold each other up. Instead, they'd buried truths, built walls, and left me stumbling through the ruins. Later that evening, as I prepared to leave, David stopped me at the door. His voice was low, almost conspiratorial. "Karine," he said, "your Aunt Flora, she isn't as fragile as she looks. Be careful. She's lived with her secrets for decades. People who cling to lies that long don't give them up without consequence." His warning followed me all the way home. And for the first time, I realized this wasn't just about me uncovering my family's past. It was about survival, mine, and maybe even theirs. As I lay in bed that night, one truth settled heavily in my chest. If Flora wasn't finished telling her story, then neither was the danger that came with it. The morning after the heated confrontation felt like walking through a storm's aftermath. Everything looked calm, but beneath the surface, chaos still roared. I woke up in my old bedroom, staring at the faded wallpaper I had once traced with my fingertips as a girl. The walls that once made me feel safe now seemed to close in on me. The echoes of last night's argument, my father's silence, Aunt Flora's trembling fury, and my own raw words kept playing in my head. I demanded answers, begged for honesty, but what I received only deepened the chasm between us. By breakfast, the house was suffocating with unspoken tension. Aunt Flora didn't come down. My father sat at the table, nursing a cup of coffee he barely sipped. His eyes avoided mine, and I didn't push him. My heart ached, but I knew that forcing words out of him would be pointless. I left earlier than usual for class, though my mind wasn't on law lectures. I walked to campus slowly, needing air, needing space to think. At school, I forced myself to focus. But even as professors droned on about constitutional law and case precedents, my thoughts drifted back to Austin. His soft voice, the way he listened without judgment, had stayed with me. There was something healing in his presence, something I needed now more than ever. That afternoon, I returned to his house. Austin greeted me with his usual calm smile, his cane tapping lightly as he moved toward me. "You sound tired," he said, tilting his head slightly as though he could sense the heaviness I carried. "I didn't sleep well," I admitted. "Family things." He didn't ask for details, and I was grateful. Instead, he guided us to the veranda, where the air was cooler. For a while, we sat in silence, the kind that didn't demand filling. It felt good to breathe without pretending. But then he said something that caught me off guard. "You know, sometimes the people who hurt us the most are the ones who think they're protecting us." I turned to him, startled. "What do you mean?" He chuckled softly. "I don't know your story, but I know people. Parents. Siblings. They lie not because they don't care, but because they think the truth is too heavy for us." His words hit me like a blow. That was exactly what Aunt Flora and my father had done, buried secrets in the name of protection. But instead of shielding me, it had broken my trust. When I left that evening, his words followed me home. At dinner, Aunt Flora finally appeared. She looked pale but composed, as if she had spent the day rehearsing her lines. My father barely touched his food. I kept quiet, determined not to be the one to ignite another explosion. But silence, too, can be sharp. Halfway through the meal, Aunt Flora set down her fork and looked straight at me. "Karine, you have to understand. We didn't tell you everything because we thought it would destroy you." Her voice was calm, almost pleading, but it only fueled my anger. "Destroy me?" I snapped. "Do you have any idea what your silence has done? I don't even know who to trust anymore. My father's hand trembled as he set down his glass. We wanted to spare you pain. I leaned forward, my voice shaking. And what did you achieve? Because the only thing I feel now is betrayal. The room fell into a heavy silence. I could see tears brimming in Aunt Flora's eyes, but I couldn't let myself be softened by them. Not tonight. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Their faces haunted me, their excuses echoing in my head. And then, like a whisper, Austin's words returned. Sometimes the people who hurt us the most are the ones who think they're protecting us. But what if their protection had cost me the one thing I valued most, truth? I turned over in bed, restless. The truth was no longer just a desire. It was a need, a burning hunger. I couldn't let their secrets define me any longer. Whatever they were hiding, I had to uncover it myself. And for the first time, I wondered if Austin, gentle, perceptive Austin, might be the only person I could trust to help me find it. The night after Samuel's escape from the estate, I couldn't sleep. Every sound, the creak of the wooden beams, the rustle of the wind outside, even the faint drip of water in the pipes, felt amplified, a reminder that danger was still lurking in the shadows. Harris sat by the fire in his study, staring into the flames as if searching for answers, while Bennett paced restlessly, his jaw tight with frustration. We had driven Samuel out, but something told me he wasn't finished. Men like him didn't just disappear. They circled back, waiting for the right moment to strike harder. The following morning, Harris called a meeting. His voice, though strained, carried authority. We cannot ignore what just happened. Samuel knows too much about this family, too many secrets that could tear everything apart. Bennett shot him a sharp look. He already has. He's working with Kelly and Mark. That much is clear. My heart skipped at the mention of their names. Kelly, the woman I had begun to suspect was orchestrating so much of this chaos, and Mark, her shadowy partner in crime. They were still out there, pulling strings, waiting for us to slip. What do they want? I asked softly, though I already knew the answer. Harris's eyes met mine, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of genuine fear in them. Control. Money. Power. And they will destroy anyone who stands in their way, even family. The word family hung in the air like smoke. I thought of the fractured relationships I had already witnessed in this mansion, the betrayal, the lies, the shifting loyalties. Harris wasn't just talking about his daughter-in-law or Mark. He was talking about bloodlines, inheritance, and everything that bound them together in a fragile poison knot. That night, Bennett and I walked along the garden paths, the moon casting a cold glow on the stone statues and trimmed hedges. His hand brushed against mine, not out of romance but as if to anchor himself. I don't trust anyone anymore, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Not even my own blood. Every time I think I understand their motives, another layer of deceit is revealed. And now with Samuel gone, I can't shake the feeling that something much worse is coming. I looked at him, seeing not the wealthy heir but the exhausted man beneath the weight of secrets he never asked to inherit. You're not alone in this, I told him. Whatever happens, we'll face it together. For a brief moment, I thought I saw relief in his eyes. But the illusion was short-lived. 2 days later, the first strike came. One of Harris's trusted staff members, his driver of 20 years, was found beaten in the garage, unconscious, his keys and phone missing. The doctors said he'd survive, but the message was clear. The estate wasn't safe anymore. They're moving closer, Bennett growled, slamming his fist against the desk in Harris's study. They're not just circling us. They're inside our walls. Harris rubbed his temple, his voice trembling with both age and dread. This family is eating itself alive. Kelly, Mark, Samuel, they're turning us against one another. And if we don't act, they'll succeed. That night, I couldn't help but think of Kelly. I had only seen glimpses of her sharp smile, her calculating eyes, but every instinct in me screamed that she was the true architect behind this unraveling. She wasn't just after wealth. She was after dominance. And then came the call. The house phone rang in the dead of night, shrill and unsettling. Bennett answered, his voice rough with sleep. I watched from the doorway, my breath held tight. After a moment of silence, his face drained of color. "No, that's not possible," he whispered before slamming the phone down. "What happened?" I rushed forward. He looked at me, his voice breaking. "Kelly and Mark, they've made their move. They've taken someone from us." Before I could ask who, Harris entered, pale as parchment. "It's Andrew," he said hoarsely. "My grandson. He's missing." The room spun around me. Andrew, innocent, young, caught in the middle of this storm of betrayal and greed. My heart sank with the realization that this was no longer a game of power. It was war. And Kelly had just escalated it to a level none of us were prepared for. I glanced at Bennett, whose eyes burned with fury and despair. He wasn't just an heir anymore. He was a brother, a protector, and now he had been provoked beyond reason. And as for me, I realized I wasn't just a bystander caught in the middle of a wealthy family's tragedy. I was part of it now, tangled in their war, their bloodlines, their sins. And Kelly had just made her most dangerous move yet. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I shut my eyes, Harris's warning echoed in my head. "Don't trust appearances, Lucy. In this house, masks are worn too easily." I tossed and turned until the first light of dawn seeped through my curtains. My nerves were stretched thin, and it felt as though the mansion itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to break. Downstairs, the kitchen smelled of fresh bread and coffee. Mrs. Hargrove greeted me with her usual warmth, though I caught her glancing at me in that knowing way of hers, almost as if she could sense that I was carrying secrets in my chest. "Rough night?" she asked softly, sliding a mug of coffee toward me. I nodded. I keep thinking about Harris. He wants me to help him, but I'm not sure I even understand what's happening." She leaned closer, her voice lowering. "You don't have to understand everything right away. Just trust what you feel. Sometimes that's clearer than the facts." Her words lingered with me as I carried Harris's breakfast tray up to his room. When I walked in, he was already awake, propped against his pillows with a book in his hand. His eyes, sharp, calculating despite the frailty of his body, lifted to meet mine. "You've made up your mind, haven't you?" he asked before I even set the tray down. I swallowed. "I want to help you, but I don't know where to start." A faint smile tugged at the corner of his lips. "Then I'll start for you." He gestured toward the bedside table. There, tucked under a folded napkin, was a small black notebook. I hesitated, then picked it up. The leather was worn, and when I opened it, my breath caught. Inside were notes, dates, and names scribbled in Harris's tight handwriting. "Everything you need to know," he said, his voice a rasp. "Kelly, Mark, the finances, the changes in my will. You'll see the pattern. You'll see what they're after." My hands trembled as I flipped through the pages. It wasn't just idle paranoia. The entries detailed missing sums of money, secret meetings between Kelly and Mark, and subtle manipulations of household staff. Harris had been watching them long before I arrived. And now, by trusting me with his notebook, he was pulling me fully into his world. I looked up at him, heart pounding. "Why me? Why not Bennett?" His expression hardened. "Because Bennett doesn't see the danger clearly. He loves too blindly, forgives too easily. You, Lucy, you've got sharp eyes. You notice things." I didn't know whether to feel honored or terrified. Maybe both. Later that afternoon, I slipped out into the garden to clear my thoughts. The notebook weighed heavily in my pocket, like a secret burning against my skin. That's when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned expecting Bennett, but it was Kelly. Her smile was polished, but her eyes glittered with something darker. "You've gotten close to Father lately," she remarked casually, though her tone carried an edge. "He seems to trust you." I forced a polite smile. "I suppose he just enjoys the company." Kelly tilted her head, studying me. "Be careful, Lucy. My father has a way of dragging people into his old grudges. Not everything he says should be taken at face value." Her words were smooth, but my chest tightened. She knew something, or at least suspected. And if she ever found out about the notebook, I had no doubt she'd do whatever it took to make it disappear. That evening, when Bennett found me on the terrace, I tried to act normal, but he noticed right away. He always did. "You're pale," he said, gently brushing his hand against mine. "What's wrong?" I wanted so badly to tell him everything, to show him the notebook, to ask for his help, but Harris's warning echoed again in my mind. Bennett forgives too easily. So instead, I forced a smile and whispered, "I'm just tired." But even as Bennett kissed my forehead and held me close, I knew that this secret, this notebook, was the beginning of a dangerous path. And once I started down it, there would be no turning back. I woke up the next morning to the smell of freshly brewed coffee and the faint hum of someone moving about in the kitchen. For a second, I thought it was just a dream, that the night before hadn't really happened, that I hadn't actually stood in front of David and told him that I was ready to build something new with him. But then, as I stretched and opened my eyes, I saw the neatly folded blanket at the foot of my bed and the faint glow of morning sunlight spilling through the curtains. I smiled. It was real. All of it. I pulled on a sweater and padded barefoot into the kitchen. David stood there, sleeves rolled up, humming softly to himself as he flipped pancakes in a skillet. The sight was almost surreal. This man, who had once seemed so untouchable and complicated, was here in my kitchen, making breakfast like it was the most natural thing in the world. He turned at the sound of my footsteps, his smile warm and easy. "Good morning. I hope you like pancakes." I laughed. "Depends. Are they the regular kind, or are you secretly a terrible cook?" "Only one way to find out," he teased, sliding a golden pancake onto a plate and setting it in front of me. I sat down at the table, watching him as he moved around the kitchen. It was strange, the comfort I felt in his presence. Just weeks ago, my world had felt fractured, uncertain, and painfully heavy. But now, sitting here, sipping coffee and eating pancakes, it felt like a glimpse of the life I had always dreamed of, the kind of life where love wasn't rushed, where trust wasn't broken, where family could be rebuilt instead of torn apart. "Clara," David's voice broke into my thoughts. He sat across from me, his expression more serious now. "There's something I've been meaning to ask you." My heart thudded nervously. "What is it?" He reached across the table, his hand brushing mine. "Last night, when you said you wanted to build something new, did you mean it? Not just for today or tomorrow, but for the long haul? Because I want to be sure we're walking into this with the same intentions." I swallowed hard. The honesty in his eyes left no room for hesitation. "I meant every word, David. I don't want something fleeting. I want a life. A real one with you." Relief washed over his features, and he squeezed my hand. "Then we'll take it one step at a time. Together." For the rest of breakfast, we didn't need many words. The silence between us wasn't heavy. It was comforting, filled with unspoken understanding. Later that day, we decided to take a walk along the edge of the city. The streets were busy, filled with chatter, vendors, and the chaos of everyday life, but somehow it all seemed quieter with him beside me. He pointed out little things he loved about the city. The cafe where he used to spend hours sketching designs, the bookstore that carried rare legal journals, even the corner where he and Austin once got caught in the rain and ended up laughing like children. Every story pulled me closer to him. Every laugh we shared felt like stitching up the pieces of my broken past. At one point, we stopped near a park bench, watching children play. I felt a pang deep inside, thinking of all the years I had wasted on pain, resentment, and distance. But then David leaned close and whispered, "You know, I can picture us here someday, watching our grandchildren play, growing old together." His words hit me like a soft wave. Not overwhelming, not frightening, just steady, like an anchor. For the first time in years, I let myself imagine it. Not just surviving, not just getting through each day, but truly living. A future where love wasn't a gamble, but a choice we made again and again. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, I realized something important. My journey hadn't just been about finding love with David. It had been about finding myself again, reclaiming the pieces of me I thought were lost forever. And standing there, with his hand resting gently over mine, I knew I wasn't just looking at a man. I was looking at tomorrow. I should have known peace wouldn't last. For a few days, life inside Harris's mansion felt almost normal. I'd started to get used to the quiet mornings, sipping coffee on the balcony while Harris dozed in the living room. Bennett would occasionally stop by, and each time, my chest tightened just a little more than before. But beneath the surface, tension pulsed like a low drumbeat, waiting to erupt. It began with a single envelope. One morning, as I returned from the pharmacy with Harris's prescriptions, I noticed a cream-colored letter slipped under the front door. There was no stamp, no address, just my name in bold black ink. My stomach dropped. Nobody should have known I was here. I tore it open, my hands trembling. Leave now while you still can. You don't know the danger you're in. The family eats its own. That was it. No signature. No explanation. Just those chilling words. I shoved the letter into my pocket before Harris could see. He was already suspicious of my lingering silences and pale face, and I didn't want to alarm him. But I couldn't shake the feeling that every shadow in the house had started watching me. That night, Bennett came by to check on his grandfather. When Harris fell asleep, I pulled him aside and showed him the note. His jaw clenched. It's Kelly. It has to be. She's trying to scare you off. But why target me? I'm just a nurse, I whispered, though deep down, I knew I was lying to myself. You're more than that, he said, his voice low but firm. You've seen too much. She knows it. I swallowed hard, remembering the overheard conversations, the late-night phone calls, the way Kelly's eyes had followed me like a hawk whenever we crossed paths. Lucy, Bennett continued, if things get worse, I want you to promise me something. What? That you'll leave immediately. Don't wait around. Don't try to fix this. Just go. His words should have brought me comfort, but instead they filled me with dread. I didn't want to leave. Not Harris, not him. The following days only deepened the unease. Kelly began visiting the mansion more frequently, always with Mark by her side. They put on the act of a concerned daughter-in-law and loyal family friend, but the way they whispered in corners, exchanging quick glances, told another story. One evening, after Harris had gone to bed, I passed the study and heard Kelly's voice rise in sharp frustration. This can't go on forever, Mark. He's clinging to life, and that nurse, she's becoming a problem. If Bennett keeps protecting her, we'll lose everything. I froze, pressing my back against the wall. Mark's reply came low and steady, then maybe the problem needs to be handled. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure they'd hear it. I stumbled back to my room, locked the door, and slid to the floor, shaking. This wasn't just about money or power anymore. I was in real danger. The next morning, I woke to find my car keys missing. At first, I thought I'd misplaced them, but after searching everywhere, even the laundry, I knew better. Someone had taken them. And then, as if on cue, the phone in my room rang. I lifted the receiver with trembling fingers. Still here. The voice was distorted, mechanical, but the malice was unmistakable. You don't listen well. Maybe we'll have to teach you a lesson. Click. The dial tone hummed in my ear, cold and final. That night, as I sat with Bennett in the dimly lit kitchen, I finally broke. They're going to come after me, I whispered, my voice cracking. I can feel it. His hand closed over mine, warm and steady. Then we'll face them together. But you're not alone in this, Lucy. Not anymore. His words anchored me, but in my chest, fear and hope tangled like two fighting flames. Because one thing was certain now, the storm was coming. And when it hit, none of us would walk away unchanged.
Secret phrase is family drama.